Hey, everybody. Welcome back to Listen for Real. I'm Jen Oliver. I'm here with Jon Kohrs, an author and just dazzling soul and human that I am really excited for you to know. We are going to dive right in with me explaining why I would bring Jon here, because many of you might be new to this podcast, and it's really important to me that you understand that my premise is that this platform and the conversations that I have here are the antidote to the echo chamber, meaning for the vast majority of my adult life, I have operated under a certain belief system that was formed by my political viewpoints, by my religious influences, my high socioeconomic status. I'm American born, I'm white, I'm cisgendered, was in heteronormative marriages for much of my life, though I'm not now. That still really informs so much of who I am. And all of those things, plus you add, any conservative influences or faith practices, they create sometimes a really tidy little echo chamber. And I was deep in it. And then you surround yourself with people or institutions or news sources or social media that might reinforce that little echo chamber. And it's really hard to get away from putting people in boxes, from making judgments of all varieties. And I don't want to do that. I discovered a number of years ago I was really missing out on a great deal of a huge number of really wonderful souls, in and around me. And then B, that there was an aspect of life I was just, I was not seeing. And I wanted to have conversations like this one where my perspective would be broadened, where my paradigms would be shifted, and that I would grow as a soul and get more real. That's why this podcast is called Listen for Real, because I really want to listen more deeply, not just to myself, but to others, and to grow more real and authentic and true myself. And so Jon has a very different lived experience in many ways than myself. In some ways, we definitely cross-pollinate. We'll get into that. But you, Jon, wrote a book that it's called Horribly Lovely, right? And it is so raw and real. And I immediately just went, this person right here, oh my word, yes, to being this transparent. So before I have you introduce yourself to everyone and just give them a sense, if we were all here at a cocktail party or in a tea house and we were just getting to know each other, that's the vibe here, Jon, is you would just talk about who you are. You wouldn't read your bio. And but I want to introduce you first by reading what Dr. Lois Wilkins put in your intro to your book, okay? Because I just think this says so much and it's exquisitely stated. All right. So she says, I could just go crazy already with this, but I'm going to stay really calm. Okay. She says, Horribly Lovely, which is the title of your book, is aptly titled, offering an intimate, deep dive into a tumultuous journey of self-indulgence, profound narcissism, and a sense of being spoiled. As readers work through these initial value judgments, they will arrive at an appreciation for the vulnerability found in such passion-driven self-disclosure. This allows them to witness one man's multidimensional failures and successes in his quest to live life fully human. Carl Jung teaches us that the essential quest for each person is to become fully human. And Jonathan exemplifies this endeavor by the explicit details of his experiences found throughout the pages of this book. And now, catch this, y'all, okay? The alchemy of a well-lived life requires an openness to expose oneself to oneself, embracing both the bitter and the sweet. It is no surprise that this book delves into what some might perceive as extreme escapism, highlighted through experiences with altered states induced by sex, drugs, and alcohol. This book is raw, akin to a snake shedding its skin, shedding what's no longer useful. The story invites readers to explore the depths of human experience, unfiltered and uncensored. Already, you're just exquisite in my mind. And Dr. Wilkins just said that so beautifully. So with that, that's a hell of an intro, baby, but let's go.
Yeah, we'll try
Will
to
you
build up
just
to we'll try to build up
yeah,
to that.
I mean, well, it gives people a foreshadowing too of we're gonna get into it, y'all, and I'm
Hmm.
never shy on this podcast. We talk about all things real. We're gonna be talking about all things real because that's life here on planet Earth, right? It just is. So, John, hi. I'm so happy you're here. Tell everyone everything you want them to know about you. No
Well,
pressure.
first, I just thank Dr. Lois Wilkins. I met her about a year ago and have been studying with her around depth psychology and being a Jungian analyst. She just has a very different perspective on life, and her words and her just watching how she works has been pure bliss. I felt very, very seen. So thank you. I'm a little caught off guard because you're the first person that's actually read that back to me. I mean, I've read it a couple times, but you're the first person on air that's ever read that back to me. So I had a very interesting soul response of goosebumps and tears forming in my eyes and energy flowing different places. So this will be a fun time with you. And sitting before this, I kept thinking, what is the energy of this call? And I got pain. And even when we were doing our introduction, and I felt like so held by coming on board and getting ready to speak, I just felt like this capacity to hold pain and a very, very different kind of meditation. And even now I hear these voices saying, what is the pain of fusion?
Mm.
Of trying so desperately to be loved and to be one. I think you said it on one of your recent talks. I have it written here. Pursuing love and the identity of me. And there's this constant search to find the person to complete you, and that is the divine love that somewhere in us we know it's this eternal feeling all of us have. But in that, for me, a lot of that quest was a fusion. It's a forgetting who I am and trying to become one through somebody else instead of being an individual.
Okay,
And
okay, let's wait.
yeah,
I want you to break that down for a minute because fusion, not everyone's going to follow that
yeah,
term.
yeah,
So just illustrate more for me what you mean. I get it because it's been a quest of my own, but would you just explain that a little more deeply?
yeah. And let me give you some real stories.
Please.
In my marriage, I really became the other. I became my wife. It's like, there's this glorification of being an empath, I think, in society. You know, I think we're all empathic to a certain degree, but there's these boundaries I think you learn when you're a child. You get mirroring back to you of here's who you are. There's this respect of boundaries, and there's you using your voice and all these things. I think when those don't get developed, and I absolutely felt that way in my childhood, and we can talk about that more, there is this like boundaryless connection with people to where when I would be in romantic relationships, whatever the other person thought, I thought, whatever the person felt, I felt, whatever the person wanted to be, I wanted to be. And it felt so safe to be fused. It's like you take a circle of one person and a square of the other person, and you
Mhm.
put them together, and you allow yourself to be devoured.
As opposed to a Venn diagram where there's a piece of you too that overlaps.
Yeah, or like a circle and a square that touch each other, but they're never quite touching. They're
Yeah.
each independent and they're together at the same time, and they
Yeah.
both have individual identities and realities. Um,
Yeah.
to me, it felt like this very safe container. I would go into somebody's world. It would almost like I would go into their psyche, and that was my reality. And I would borrow that identity, and in borrowing that identity, I felt very safe. I felt like I would never, ever, ever be abandoned because,
Mm.
why would anybody ever abandon someone that was so connected to them?
Well, because you're craving, right, a union. You're
Hmm.
craving unity. You're
Yeah.
creating that merging. So that makes all the sense in the world to me. So what would that look like in you? Do you want to draw an example that's either in the book or not?
Yeah. Like an example of fusion
In your
specifically.
life.
Boy, it was like my entire life. And you can read the entire book and it's what a fusion. Maybe I'll lens it with, for those listeners out there that are familiar with the Enneagram. I'm an Enneagram type 9, and I have a sexual instinct. So there is this absolute drive for fusion.
Okay.
So, some really specific examples in my life would be, getting married and taking on the values of what does that mean, and even having children. Like, I'm so blessed by having children. I'm so lucky that the universe all orchestrated this. But in hindsight, I didn't know, but I thought I really wanted children because the other one wanted children. And part of the pain of Horribly Lovely started with a lot of addictions. And part of those addictions were love addictions and having affairs with individuals. And even now I'm trying to parse out, was that me that wanted to have the affair, or was I reading their lust or their romantic energy that I fell into? It's almost like falling into a love soup and kind of being stirred around, and you just believe you're that.
Mm.
And there wasn't this like identity. It's like, even if somebody said, what do you desire in your life, or what do you like to do, or where do you want to go? I couldn't answer that question unless I was totally alone in the woods somewhere, walking on some path. And then I could go ask myself, like I would have to ask the parts, or I would have to ask a tree. I would have to ask something, what do I really desire, to try to find that answer? Because my energy was leaking out so much because I was so unboundaried. There wasn't that container of who am I as an individual and what do I really desire and want.
Don't you feel that is not okay? What you just expressed, I think, is the vast majority of us. I think it's a rare human who intuitively understands how to check and go inward and check in with themselves. We all look to the external. I think that is just, I don't know how we undo that. And I don't know if we're completely meant to. That's for a whole other dissertation.
Yeah.
But don't you, because that is my experience, is there's this unraveling of always seeking what's external and kind of doing this to the wind to determine something. And it is only in recent years that I'm recognizing I even have a body, that my body has an intuition and an instinct, that my body is the voice of my spirit and soul, that this is voice of ego and personality and culture. I'm pointing to my mind. And so I talk about that a lot here because it's so inherent to my journey, especially in these last few years. So how do you even become, is it the pain, the depravity, the absolute bottom that makes you go, wow, I'm still looking for this from everywhere else, including a tree. And really, if I get so still and quiet and go internal, I'll find this. And then there's a purity to it and a wholeness to it that is far more satisfying. Do you get where I'm going? Like, how
I
did you navigate that?
I do. You maybe to get into this question to you too is, this idea of disassociation and not being in your body. How long did it take you in your life to maybe get that mirror back, or have somebody say, hey, I don't see you behind your eyes, or I don't see you in your body? When was it in your life that you had that like epiphany? That
Yeah, I would say where I'm aware of it since age 50, and I'm 54, in the last 4 years. But I would say now with hindsight, I can see little clues along the way that got me to the ability to see it at 50 or beyond 50. Really, honestly, it's more in the last 2 years, I would say. That's my guess. If I look back, I can see things all the way into my teenage years that are a little more clear to me, but I just didn't see it then.
Yeah, I'm
Yeah.
exactly the same.
Yeah.
Even now, people will use the words. And I can have the sensate the experience of it, but it's still such a foreign idea because I realized most of my entire life I was disassociated or not in my body.
Yeah.
And like, it took me forever. What do you mean by that? Of course I'm in my body. I'm moving my arms. I'm moving my legs. And it probably wasn't until, I would say, ketamine. Maybe a story is in a book. There's journeys through ayahuasca, plant medicine, trips to Peru, trips all over the world, meditations, ketamine trips, LSD trips. There's a lot that was that seeking, but seeking into this transpersonal reality, some other place that felt more like home. And that home was not in a human body. It was somewhere else. But somewhere in that, I was doing work somehow at a soul level to understand how to get back in my body. And one of those journeys I remember was doing ketamine, and I had a facilitator. We were going through it, and we were trying to understand these protectors, these parts inside of me that were like protecting me from actually getting back inside my body. And I remember taking the ketamine, and it was about 30 minutes, and time just slowed. It's like time and space just became infinite. And somewhere in that, it felt so much like home. It felt like this is what it's supposed to be like. And there wasn't all the bombardment of noise and people trying to get my attention and all this human stuff that me being neurodivergent and really sensitive, it's like there wasn't any of that stuff to push me out of my body. And these protectors, I could see them kind of guarding this entrance into me, and they just stopped. And it's like I could walk down this path past these protectors and into my body. And when I went there, we were listening to music, and it was music I had never felt before. It was like I could feel every single intention and the beauty of every single note and the elegance and dance of this. And it was like, it wasn't like I was fusing with the music. It was like I was inside my body experiencing music. And just, it was the comprehension of seeing myself enjoy being a human and enjoy this moment without being overwhelmed all the time with what I perceived as chaos. And I just breathed. And it felt like I'd never breathed before in my life. And I'm like, this is what it feels like to breathe. Halfway through, I had to go to the restroom. And even in going to the restroom, I thought, oh, this is what it feels like to be in a body and do this. I had no comprehension of that. But with that, I could feel the desires I had inside of me and the unique perspective I had from, it's like all these experiences I had in my life were in my body DNA, but I was up here like floating around trying to analyze it all the time and trying to make sense of it instead of just being in it. So it's like this bombardment of my life experiences just came through and wove into this beautiful tapestry that I could see, oh, this was love here, and this is why this happened, and oh, this felt so good. And I remember just crying. It's like I just longing to be a human and to experience the world and realize, I actually hadn't been in a body. Doing that.
You know what you're making me think of? So riddle me this. Okay, let's play with this idea for a minute. It just occurred to me. I was thinking about all of the things you reference and talk about in your book, be it drugs, alcohol, sex, infidelities, all the things. Okay. And in that intro, we talked about it, or Dr. Lois talked about it as a form of escapism. But I am hearing myself in some of the things you're describing, and I can only speak for myself, but it makes me wonder if this has an element with you or other people listening. I wonder if it's actually a desire to feel. I think it's not a means of escaping for me at all. In fact, I think whether it's been alcohol, drugs, sex, for me, it is a craving to feel more intensely and to feel more deeply, not to escape. And so can you speak to that is it a both and? It's escapism, but really it's actually a craving, like I want to feel this intensity so deeply. And so the way I know how to get there is add more, add more, add more, whether it's an intoxicant, whether it's sex, whatever it is, right? Add more because I'm craving the intensity or I want to go deeper. And in actuality, I don't know. That just came to me as you were speaking, and I wonder what you think about that.
Yeah. Well, maybe getting into that question, when you first started some of these things, because it feels like there's a personal experience of just feeling that sensate quality during these, what was your first experience like that? And what drew you to that first experience of maybe doing plant medicine or one of these alternative therapy techniques?
Okay. Well, first of all, before you say that, define sensei in the way you just used it.
Yeah. Sensate, like you can feel it somatically in your body. It's like a tactile feel, like, in sex or drugs or these things, like your body is actually feeling things.
Okay.
Like, was that one of your first experiences? And do you remember some of your intentions for some of those first ceremonies?
Okay. So if we're talking about ceremonies, so mine is limited really to ketamine. And my situation, what brought me to the ketamine was different in that I was in a profound depression at the time. So I was in a really bad season of depression and knew of some doctors who had a healing center that was all ketamine-based psychotherapy. So my journeys were similar to what you describe, but very personal to me. I just remember it was more of a relaxation and a peace more than a feeling in my body, and that feeling because I was definitely deep into my journey. There was no real I left my body is what it felt like to me, as opposed to felt more in touch with my body and in connection. So that's where my experience diverts from yours. For me, it calmed and made sense more of what I was thinking and feeling, for
Yeah.
lack of a better explanation. It's
Kind
so
of
hard to
slow.
explain, right?
Yeah, it kind of slowed it all down. Maybe it felt like,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yep,
And there was an intensity to it that I loved and craved. And I remember thinking, I get why people who want to drop into it's almost like a sinking into just this gorgeous warm pool of water, and that's just deep and luxurious and warm and surrounds you like a womb. And of course, when you feel that with a drug or anything else, who wouldn't want more? Of course. I mean, it's magical, right? So I get that craving. But yeah, it's still, this is all still something that I am really little by little understanding. And it's a slow build for me.
yeah.
Yeah.
It's a really complicated question. As you start to pursue these experiences, is it the intensity of feeling and being in your body, or is it a form of your ego trying to find a spiritual bypass to stay in this state? And that's so tricky to discern. And
So it's totally both.
it is, and I think it's different for each person. I think for my journey, I mean, I was going to Sedona and doing spiritual journeys, and every single time I could do a ceremony, I would. And, I had my kids that were growing older each day. And I remember going to these spiritual retreats and co-facilitating them. And my daughter was asking me, "Hey, Dad, can you come to the school dance with me?" And there are so many moments. I mean, they're in high school now. There's so many moments I'm not going to get back because I thought, these affairs and getting divorced and abandoning my family, like I had to figure out, why did I do this? Like,
Mm,
what is this narcissism in me and this self-indulgence and this addiction to love and sex? And like, I felt like I was destroying my family. And
mm,
I absolutely projected that into that situation based on my father and feelings I had towards my father that I wasn't fully conscious of how much pain and chaos he had imparted onto my mother. And I didn't want to be my dad. And this search into these different therapeutic techniques, I guess, was an attempt to not to be him.
mm.
But in that, the Enneagram eventually gave me some grounding and relationships that came around. One specifically that everybody allowed me to fuse. They loved it. And nobody really called me on my shit. And this relationship was the first one where she did not let me fuse. And she forced me to be independent. And
Mm.
I found a lot of grounding in my spiritual journey, and the Enneagram was one of those. Within that, it gave me a map, and it said things like, in your nineness, your ego wants to fuse because it's so afraid of being abandoned. But in essence, there is this harmony and peace that you feel. So, to answer your question, it was to feel, but a lot of these journeys, I feel like we're spiritual bypassing, where it was trying to go into the spirit realm, which felt so normal to me.
Mm-hmm.
And I could go there and find peace and harmony, playing in the astral plane. And when I was a kid, I would sit in the bathtub. It's the only memory I really remember of childhood, is sitting in the bathtub constantly, closing my eyes and going up and floating amongst the stars and talking to angels and building shields and weapons and kind of having this like energetic warfare somewhere.
Wow. That's amazing.
I don't know if it's amazing. It's just what
I think it is. That's incredible.
it's
Wow.
how I think my psyche was trying to give me content. It's like, there's so much chaos in your childhood. You don't feel safe being in a human body because you are absorbing every single thing around you. So we're going to take you out to the spirit realm, and we're going to show you what's happening there. You're in war. You're fighting all these things attacking you. We're going to give you this movie at a different realm. That's what your body's experiencing. But to me, that became the safest place. So in
Wow.
these ceremonies, going there, it was so easy to be a spirit in this collective that I was fused in just energy.
Mm-hmm.
I think the challenge has been in, how do I have those same boundaries in a human body, and how do I have this divine experience while also being a messy human?
Mhm.
I think that's what Lois spoke about, and it's a
Mhm.
trick. But I think it can be a both and. Just like the story of ketamine, I said it is disassociative, but it actually allowed me to go in and find peace and harmony within my own body.
So that makes me wonder then, how have you navigated the very human aspect of remorse, regret, pain, knowing pain you've caused other people, pain you've caused yourself? You referenced it with your kids. I recognize that too. I look back. That's probably my greatest source of pain, is wishing I had been more present at moments with my kids or had done something different. And again, all I can do is own it now. All I can do is own my part and apologize to them and do differently in at this point. But boy, that and shame is just a bitch, right? And it's just a
Total bitch.
total
Yeah.
and it's a tool of ego, and it's not. One of my coaches just recently has been really trying to unpack this with me, and she said, "Jen, anytime I hear you say the word should, I hear shame and I hear ego. And your highest self will never say the word should, ever." And I was like, "What? That's impossible, because my highest self wants to constantly do better and be better." And she goes, "Oh, nope, 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 nope." And I was like, it's like a fool's errand, it feels like sometimes. So
Well, it is.
tell me about that for you.
Well, and I mean, this is at the soul of the book. It
Yeah.
started 9 years ago as, let me talk about these love addictions and these romantic relationships and the insanity of them, through my marriage and getting divorced. And then it became really a journey of, the spiritual bypassing and all these things I was doing. And then it became about love addiction and realizing, it's more about love addiction. And then it became about like the masculine and feminine and who am I? And there's this part that feels very natural, kind of almost being very feminine inside of me. So that was the journey. Then it was a journey of fatherhood and like, who am I as a father? And, I think the journey really is about finding home. And to me, home is being a human. It's like this greatest gift going through those levels. So in this idea of shame is absolutely buried in the entire book. We could talk about this for hours.
Mhm.
One way to get into this, if anybody's seen the series Lucifer, I don't know if you've ever seen this
I
series
haven't seen
Lucifer.
it, but I know of it. Yeah,
Yeah,
keep going.
it's a very kitschy kind of romantic play off of what if Lucifer came back to Earth and let hell be ruled by other people, and what is his existential crisis with his father, God? What would it look like if these angels and figures that we read about are actually like have the same human problems?
Mm.
The essence of that for me, and I spent a lot of time visiting with my therapist about it, is it's about shame. And in it, Lucifer finds this point of shame in each person, but he does it by asking them what their deepest desire is. And then in that desire is also the shame that they're trying to get out of, which is the hell he wants to put them in. So let me give you an
Whoa.
example.
Yeah.
And I use this a lot for a year, thinking, what do I deeply desire? I really want to be a good dad. And I feel so bad that I was such a bad dad. And
Mhm.
part of that is I didn't want to be like my dad. All of that was not true. Like, my dad was a great dad and I was a great dad, but I was so desirous of being a good dad. I ran away from every relationship thinking that it was pulling me away from my kids. And the shame underneath that desire was, I have really messed up my children and I am a really bad person and I'm a bad dad. And that desire, that shame underneath of it kept me looking for those same relationships and the same experiences. It was almost like I was recreating my own purgatory over and over and over again. And that shame was creating this imprisonment in every single part of life. And it was seeing that and realizing, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm not a bad dad. Maybe the desire is something very different than trying to compensate for something that I feel so wrong with. And
Mhm.
I think that wrongness was really buried in me ever since I was a little kid. I mean, having a twin in the womb that left,
Mm.
having a mother that was very, very preoccupied and almost in trauma with everything going around her. It's like
Mhm.
nobody wanted to be present with me. And
Mm.
I didn't even remember that until doing more of this work. But But in that, it's like when people aren't present with you, you think, what's wrong with me? What's wrong with
Mm-hmm.
me? And
Mm-hmm.
that was the buried thing underneath being a bad dad, is there's something wrong with me. And if there's something wrong with me, why do I deserve to be here? And
Mm-hmm.
and I give you this example because it's like, how do you go into that shame and realize it's not real? It's not.
So then you're giving me a million things I want to ask. So, because I think this is for a lot of us, I go back to that desire of you wanting to fuse and be unified with someone and create connection, because they can't leave you if you're like this. And I'm putting my hands together, y'all, like fingers clasped, enmeshed. You cannot come apart. And so, of course, if you're always afraid of no one ever wanting to be present with you, you can get them there and hopefully keep them there if you fuse with them.
Mm-hmm.
So, what did alcohol and drugs do? How did alcohol and drugs get you that? Or did
Yeah.
it just give you the cheap counterfeit?
It was another form of addiction. I mean, I'm a huge Anthony Bourdain fan, and I love Roadrunner, that series. And it's just a great story in your addiction shifting. So if it wasn't
Mhm.
love addiction, it was alcohol. If it wasn't alcohol, it was working. If it wasn't working, it was buying something. If it wasn't buying something, it was finding some seeking adventure that I had to take. It's like I could never just sit still and be present. So all of those addictions were kind of like a drama. It's like a drama story trying to keep me from actually being present with all the parts inside of me that wanted to
Mhm.
talk to me.
So, okay, so your point in saying that is at the root of everything, all of those things you just listed off one by one, at the root is the ability to not be totally present.
Yes, yes. And that's where I've gotten to so far. There's probably a lot more layers, but
Right.
it's, all the
Talk to
addiction
you
and
in 5 years. Yeah,
yeah,
exactly.
it'll all change. But this is, I'll go back to the book again. There's something about writing a book after you figure it all out and it turns into a self-help book. And then there's a
Yeah.
book where you're writing it when you're going through the pain and the messiness of it. And
Mhm.
I think that is like a self-experiential book. It's art. It's transformation is always changing. So yeah, absolutely. Those addictions were all trying to keep me away from facing the truth of what was really happening. Underneath that layer was the shame and the pain, but underneath that layer was this feeling of just feeling so wrong. Like, why is
Mhm.
nobody present with me? Even that, I was never present with anybody else.
Mhm.
And underneath that was this feeling of, if I'm so wrong, then why am I here?
Mhm.
Why am I here? It's just better to be somewhere else floating in the astral plane than to be a human. So
Mhm.
again, tough to
Does
make all
that
those threads and connections.
Yeah,
But
is that, if you don't mind me asking, has that ever led to suicidal ideations for you? Because I wanna presence that, because there's other people listening right now who either are going, "Wow, I don't get this." And y'all, it's okay if you don't, like, because this is again about expanding our perspective and shifting them where necessary. And if this does nothing else, it gives you an incredible level of compassion and understanding for other people, and maybe even a bit of curiosity, which I believe is the precursor to that level of compassion and understanding. But to those who are listening right now and you're sitting here on the couch with us going, I feel so seen. I want to presence this because that's real. And there's such a shame and a stigma attached to suicidal ideations as well. And I want to be so careful in how I couch this, but a dear friend lost a son last year. He died by suicide. And I remember she and I talking about this notion that he knew there was something different and more than what he was experiencing in the pain in his body in this human form. And she comes from a very specific faith practice that is informed by, if you had enough faith, you'd stick around and see it through and you'd make it through this pain. And I said, but I also can't help but wonder if there is a faith going, there's something better. And I kind of understand why you have such a profound faith. You would not take such a drastic leap if you weren't absolutely convinced there was something better. Now, other people would say, or you just need to escape that pain so badly, anything could be better. So again, I'm very careful. I want to be so delicate in how I preface this, but I mean to ask this question with great compassion, not to offer tacit permission for someone to go ahead and take their life. That is not what I'm trying to say, because there's something better. But do you get where I'm going? And like,
I do. I
oh,
do.
it's so complex and I want to be careful, but I know you can handle that
Yeah,
question.
absolutely. I think my entire life I've suffered from depression and suicidal ideation. And I don't think I've ever got to the point where I was right there imminently from it, but there have been places and times where I've starved myself and I've begged God to take my life, and I've looked for, manifesting outs, I guess would be the right way to say it. There have been times I've completely given up and just begged not to be here. And there's lots of layers to that. I would say from a deep layer, there's this sense of like, why am I here on this planet? Like, I just want to go back home. And why was I so abandoned that I had to come here? But that's also just, part of this feeling of wrong and feeling wrong to be a human, that I feel so flawed. But within this container of like, suicidal ideation, I think when I've gotten to it, that feeling has always been this desire to go home. It's like, I feel so unloved. I feel like there's just nothing here and there's nothing to live for anymore. And that's what's taken me there. But it's been an illusion, because during those moments, they were always during really hard romantic breakups or places where I was really in a state of suffering with who I was as a father. And now I can see the beauty in those moments. It was like sobriety. It was like the antidote to addiction. This addiction kept me spinning and unpresent and always chasing things. It kept me in this drama. But in the sobriety of that moment, there was this symphony, this music underneath of it that I could feel and experience fear and the real pain and all the stuff underneath of that was very beautiful to me. And I could see the beauty in these breakups have forced me to defuse and to be an individual and to be with myself. And I realize I don't actually love myself and spend time with me. I am so committed in becoming everybody around me, so that your image of the two fists, that I've forgotten how to even be an individual and love myself. And I am desperately alone, not because nobody wants to be with me, is because I don't know how to be with myself. And not that I don't even know, it's like I don't actually appreciate being with all those parts of me. And in those moments of suicidal ideation and even thinking and attempting it, all that became really clear. And it was like a wake up in how amazing it is to be human and be here. The other thing I would add that maybe help reinforce this was I am religious and spiritual, but I don't believe in a heaven or a hell. I really think it's every day you wake up and you're creating that around you. And I thought, if I die, I'm going to come back and see my daughter and how she reacts to this, and my son, and all the people that loved me, and all the people that really saw me that I couldn't see myself. And I'm going to have to witness that. And I'm still going to have to watch all that. And I can do it now before I commit suicide, or I can do it afterwards. Regardless, it's going to be the same thing. And I'm going to have to be forced to look at who I really am and to peel back the layers. Sorry, I got long-winded on that one, Jen. I
No,
hope
you
that's
can be as long-winded as you want. Let's do this. Let's take a quick break. And y'all, we're going to be right here on the metaphorical couch after this break. I want to just dig in a little more into some new areas, but I'm also like, I need to like take a breath, because this is so much and there's so much depth to this. And so I imagine if I'm feeling that, our beloveds in the audience are feeling the same way. So let's take a quick break. We'll be right back. And we are back. So the thing I get into, and I would say the trap I was in for so long, Jon, and I think this is many people, is we get into this black and white, very cut and dry mindset. And life is just way too nuanced for that. And most of life is in the gray area. And so I have really put those boxes around things. This is right. This is wrong. This is good. This is bad. This is sin. This is liberation, et cetera, et cetera. So can you talk about how you have navigated everything from the stuff you talk about in the book to the stuff we're talking about here, how you've navigated that tension and how you see it now?
Yeah, absolutely. I will say I'm scared to death to publish Horribly Lovely. There is an authenticity and a realness and a rawness that makes me feel like I'm very wrong to put this in the world, or will I be judged for some of these things? And I think in the process of writing the book, I was judging myself considerably. Even those that will read it will see the sabotage and the almost sometimes masochistic tendencies in order to atone for sin or wrongdoing. And I'm really scared for people to read it, and what will other people think or say or feel. So that right wrong complex has been in me for a long time. And maybe a story. I went to Slovenia with my mother a couple of years ago, and her relatives are from Slovenia. And I remember going there, and I was walking around, and Mother Mary is a very big figure in the kind of Catholic culture of Slovenia. I remember hearing her talk to me, and everywhere I went when I was walking through nature, I could hear her comforting me. There was this softness I had never really felt in my life. Growing up, there was always this hardness around me, and I could relax. And I remember her saying, "You are safest when you are truly naked."
Wow.
And in a lot of the meditations and things I had done, I'd always had a shield and armor and a cape and all these things that I thought this was the warrior in me that would protect me and keep me safe. And she took all of it off and just said, "You are safe when you are truly naked."
Wow.
To me, how I've thought about right and wrong is, for me, the right and wrong has been the thing to keep me safe. Is if I do what's right and I follow the right way to do things and I don't sin, I will be safe. And I realized maybe that's not true. Maybe the safest thing is to be real with myself and to be naked with myself and vulnerable. And I think as Lois's, that quote that you beginning her writing, she talks about this book is like a snake losing its skin. And I think there's so many parts of us that have to be expressed and witnessed and observed, even in the messiness of it.
Mm.
Because in that messiness, it's not who we are. And that has to shed. And another layer has to shed. And another layer has to shed. And eventually, when we're that real, we can get down to this part that is truly us. That is the part that really wants to be present with another. And to me, that almost, and I hate to say it's right or wrong, that the way I want to operate is, how can I be present as much as I can with everything happening inside of somebody? Because there's a beautiful process of deconstruction and de-skinning happening, so that they feel safe in showing me who they really, really, really are down there. And maybe a lot of these layers that we're getting used to are just the not us that's slowly melting away. And I think that's part of my book. Is a lot of people will probably judge the right and wrong of what I did, but it was my de-skinning process to figure out, who am I?
Yeah. So how do you navigate? And y'all, as you heard Jon reference, the book comes out as of this recording. It'll come out mid-February, and you're going to want to be on the lookout for it. And we'll give you all the ways in the show notes, of course, to connect to Jon and to his website to get his book. It is so good, y'all. I had the privilege of seeing the manuscript, and it's so good. But how do you, because this is something I wrestle with, I always want to speak so authentically, and I'm so transparent. And I always say I open the kimono and just share what's going on in my world, sometimes to a fault. I'm using my air quotes, especially on the podcast or in things I write or things I tell people. Because I want intimacy. And so to me, by sharing myself in that way, it forges, in my mind, more intimacy with people, because I love to deeply connect. I love deep conversations. I'm just so drawn to that. But also, I want to write and talk about so many things that are, the unsavory aspects of my journey. But then I think, my kids will read it, or my parents, or whatever, right? So clearly you've had to wrestle with that bear. how have you, and you still are probably because it's not out yet. So there's this piece of you like it's about to hit a tipping point. But can you talk about how that's felt for you?
Really messy and cringeworthy.
Cringe. Total cringe.
There's relationships and individuals I've shared the book with, and it is really, really hard. It's really hard. And um, I guess what I find is, what is the truth? This is the truth. And I am trying to be really curious with, why did I do this? And who
Mhm.
am I? And what is my behavior? And the book is my attempt at trying to search to find the truth of that, to be as real as I possibly can. And in the conversations I have with people, I try to find a beauty in it, to say, without you there and without all these things you did, what if your soul signed up for exactly this, to do this, so that we could both understand something more deeply. Even my daughter, boy, maybe a year ago, she knew about the book, and her mom had told her a few things about what had happened, and she just flat out asked me if I had had affairs. And there was this moment. It's like, do I try to cover this up, or do I just try to be real and truthful? And I was as truthful as I could be in that moment. And she knows the things. She hasn't read the book, and I told her it's up to her. I would just maybe appreciate a little later in life to read it. But I think part of it is, even with my dad, I wish I knew the truth. Like, what was he
Mm,
really feeling? What was really happening? What was behind the addiction? Even though it may have been painful, it was him. And it was like his soul trying to transform and trying to figure out who he was. I would rather take that and be able to read that and know who he really was, than to be under a lie and
yeah.
not know those things.
No, you're speaking to something I say all the time in my work, and both from a relationship standpoint to even when people are speaking to an audience, is that in the absence of good quality communication, we will create a fiction so far worse than what is reality. And you're speaking to that. And so when we doubt, and this is what I have to remind myself when I've had to have hard conversations in a relationship or in the ending of a relationship, or with my kids, or when I've had to own something, I would rather they were dealing with the reality of it and the truth of the matter and give them the dignity of their response than to operate in the fiction, and then they're dealing with the fictional me in the fictional scenario, and that doesn't help anyone. And in fact, it hurts them more.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I totally feel that way. And there's a model too. I think we all go through really hard things in life. And like, for me, I felt like there was this desire to cover those up and to not be seen in those places of like real pain, that I felt like people would run away from me. And I've been surprised that people show up. And I want my kids and other people to know, hey, I can be real and show these parts of me that I want to keep hidden, that are or dark or taboo. And love is being present, and people being present and being with you in those moments as you work through them. And I hope my kids would read this book someday and feel like they have the permission to do that.
Well, exactly. It's offering permission and invitation for your kids and other people to show up more real, more authentic, to have their journey, to make their mistakes, to learn from them. Shame will never, we will go into hiding. At least here's what shame does for me. Shame puts me into hide, don't get found out.
Stay
That
small.
never breeds anything good.
Yeah.
And whereas an honest admission, and perhaps that's witnessed by someone else, is there's a catharsis to it, and I'm just always careful about not seeking my catharsis. It's a little bit like in 12-step recovery when you make an amends to someone. You don't make an amends for your so that you can assuage your guilt, and then you saddle them with the bullshit. Like,
Mm-hmm.
that's great. You know?
Mm-hmm.
It's more of a, you do it and you do no harm in the process. Otherwise you're kind of missing the point, right? And so I see it in that sense of learning this fine line of what's helpful, what's harmful, what's too much, what's too little. I'm still figuring it out. You're
Yeah.
ahead of me, so
Well, I don't know if
way
I'm
to,
ahead. I think we're both on our parallel courses, trying to figure out how to be a human. And I
yeah.
just, sometimes I play these mind experiments, thinking, again, going back to being a kid and astral traveling, and this capacity to sense what people around me are wanting. I think, what if after this, we're all in this giant cocktail party and every single thing is known, and there's this loop of everybody's movies playing, like the real movies, and we can see how everything impacted everybody. And there was
Yeah.
full transparency. And we were watching this knowing like each of us had that role exactly to play, and there was this beautiful symphony that was exactly the way it was supposed to happen. And we get to marvel in that, and that we each got to have this messy experience, and it somehow all worked, and all of us grew through it. And
Yeah.
I sometimes I want to bring that into this world, is like, can we just be at that cocktail party and know there was a meaning and intent with all of it? And although it was painful and we didn't mean to do any of this,
Yeah.
there was this great awareness of understanding what it means to be a human.
Okay, but I just think you ushered it in. I think that is here. I think it's in this conversation. That is exactly what I hope it is wherever I go after this.
Me too.
But why can't it be the party we're at right now? Why not? And so I guess what I just got dismantled for me while you were saying that was, wait a minute. I can be in the presence of someone who has behaved in one way and behaved in another. And again, I think this is what it is. Let me break this back down. I think I have been very linear, thinking that I have done all these things that were labeled bad or wrong or not perfect or not right. And that now I'm on this trajectory and I'm coming down to this end of life. And so therefore I'm not doing any of those things anymore because I am so self-actualized and so grown up and have gotten enough therapy and have identified all the blah, 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 blah. And that now I'm this evolved person who doesn't behave. You know what? I behaved badly 2 nights ago.
Yeah.
Badly. I'm not pleased with myself.
Yeah.
No joke.
Yeah.
Not proud. Thinking, really, Jen, you're 54. Really? Really that happened? Like, how many times are you going to do that, girl? Like, amazing. But I was more gentle with like, okay, what's a shift here? What am I called to learn? Like this emotion that I feel and this frustration, I'm going to learn at the feet of this. Come hell or high water, I want to learn this. And I'm still awesome. I'm still fucking amazing. I'm still great energy. I still do good things in the world. I still love well and want to be loved well. Like all those things are still true. And I really, in my mind, fucked up 3 nights ago. Right.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
so the cocktail party that you're identifying is the cocktail party I want to be at always. Like that's my jam.
Yes.
That's my people. That's my party because I want to be with people. I think I don't allow it in myself, but those are the people I want to be with. Is the imperfect person who is completely a dumbass 3 nights ago and just owns it and is like, okay, here's what I'm unpacking in it.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, exactly. And there's an owning. It's like maybe we're each carrying some of this responsibility for each other at a soul level. And it's when the person in their human form gets it and they're like, oh yeah, I did this because this. But here's the deeper thing that I didn't know about. And in that doorway to my darkness was the light on the other side of it. And I realized who I am. And you see those moments and you're like, oh, okay, they got it. We all held this space for each other. It's just like in the book, like I did a lot of stupid things and I'm trying to own it. I've done amends too. And I don't know all the ripples of all that behavior, but I know on the other side, I used to be really mad at breakups and used to get really upset at how I was treated and thought I should be treated better in a relationship. And I realized when I look back, it was so beautiful. It was me being overly dependent, overly fusy, like trying to get in their space and do the hand thing that you were doing earlier where you get enmeshed. And all of that was beautiful because it forced me to be with myself and it forced me to figure out who I really was as an independent individual. And I'm so happy. Like if they were to make amends, I would say, thank you. I appreciate what you did. It was painful, but it was lovely. And I think that's the book. It's horrible and it's lovely. Like, how can it be both? There's so many paradoxes. It's not black and white. It can be both.
Exactly. It can be both, y'all. It can be both. And that is somehow I forgot and remembered that it was horribly lovely. And that's the cocktail party.
It is.
It really is, of real souls with real experiences.
Just owning our shit and realizing there's dark
such
and
a
light.
Generosity in being in that party and going, this is the soup I want to be in with these souls because it's just honest and it's real. And I am so grateful for their generosity with me, and I want to be generous with them.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, that to me is, and that is exactly what we flourish in.
Hmm.
Remember, we were saying it earlier, the shame and the judgment never produces anything good. We think whether it's in raising a child or in doing different things, if I shame that person, that will force their behavior to be better. No, it never brings out the best in people, ever. And so it's like a shame-free cocktail party.
Yeah. Like imagine like an internal roast. It's like instead of you going on stage and everybody roasting you in this kind of witty, shameful banter, it's like, hey, let me roast myself. And I did this, but it's because I did this. And you just keep
Yeah,
going deeper until you get to the point you're laughing about it and saying,
yeah,
I can't believe it was this simple and this complicated at the same point.
exactly. Exactly. I could talk to you for 9 hours, but at some point we all need to eat and sleep. Therefore, I would love it, Jon. Is there anything else you want to add? And would you tell people again where to find you? Tell them about this quiz, because I'm one of those quiz people, y'all. You heard Jon reference Enneagram. Some of you, if you are into this podcast, I know you're here because you're constantly trying to grow and shed and learn and do deep dives even into yourself, not to mention others. And so I love me a quiz. And he said, I have an alchemy quiz, and people
Ding,
can go
ding,
to my
ding.
website. So I want you to tell them what that is and what it's going to reveal in them to them, and how to find you. And then we can all get your book and maybe reconvene. That could be really
I would
cool.
love to. I would love to. So in the book, I attempt to write it as in human, real words as possible and not get lost in psychological babble or astrology, or I'll call them Jungisms, like Carl
Mm-hmm.
Jung, and using these things. I try to write from this is the lived experience in everyday words. I hope I was successful. The alchemy quiz, I would say the entire book is built on this idea of alchemy, and it's never really talked about in the book. But Carl Jung studied alchemy. It was part of like a deep fascination he had, and alchemy really is the turning of lead into gold.
Mm-hmm.
And it's this elemental orchestration of air and wind and water and fire and spirit all mixing through these stages of your life, but in these real ways. Like, where were those crucibles in your life where you just felt like things were burning away? Where were those periods of your life where you felt lifted, like you were being taken up to this higher perspective? Where were the places you were sucked in the ground that you had to look at something? Where were the emotional places where water was separating these parts of who you were? So there's this dance that's happening in everybody's life that is this alchemy of you believing you're lead and stripping those layers down into and reformulating and showing you that you're really gold. And
Mm.
within that process at the end, they call it the philosopher's stone. It's this sacred divine aspect of who you are. Like you're gold. And you can imagine, I think it's carbon that gets compressed and compressed and compressed, and it forms this diamond. But it's through that metamorphosis that you, in the experience of metamorphosis, that you realize you're a diamond. And that really is alchemy. It's the
Mm-hmm.
stripping away of not you to realize the you that you've never seen that you really are. And this alchemy quiz, I've been trying to find a way of, based on dreams and based on symbols. And, when you wake up and you see your clock say 222 every single morning and you've got these emotions, is there a way through that we can start to say, oh, you're in this stage of alchemy. And I can really see these deeper things happening inside of you and be with it, as sometimes you feel like you're in the crucible being all the things of you stripped away. So it's just an awareness of like, where am I at in becoming from lead to gold?
Okay, so as we go then, can you just paint the alchemization of Jon? So you were here. Here's some of the shedding that happened in a nutshell, obviously. Y'all get the book. It's rad. And then where are you now? What's your life now?
Yeah. I'm trying. I just got back from Mongolia last year,
Of
and
course you did.
I felt like it was this great synthesis after writing the book to be like, hey, ground in your life. And the last 3 years, I've really tried to be much more present with my kids and be a human. I think I have a better relationship with them, but not not where I want it to be like every person. My day job is as a design and innovation coach. So I spend most of my days working in healthcare, actually trying to help leaders design products. So I'm just grounding myself in that. I'm trying to write other books. I'm not trying to do lots of spiritual journeys and ceremonies anymore and fuse with this idea of spiritual divinity. I'm just trying to practice being a human and to be as present as I can and to appreciate that, there is a lot of beauty that's all around us, all helping us to allow us to be us. And
Yeah.
how do I just get to revel in being a human? And that's hard. That's really
Yeah.
hard sometimes.
Yeah.
Really hard. I would say a lot of addictions I haven't drank alcohol for 2 years. That's been, I would say my Amazon addiction of buying things flares up every once in a while, but it is much better. The love addiction, I think I've gone to a love addiction retreat 2 years ago. It's in the book. But doing things just to understand even more of those parts and to just try to be present and appreciate being a human is really it. Maybe in the spirit of disassociation, some of the conversations we have, it feels radically different not to be above my body floating in the clouds and just to try to live a life where my feet are rooted into the ground and I'm in my body. And it's a lot of yoga, qigong, body work, just trying to do things to remember that, maybe the philosopher's stone is actually being a human and having a body is the greatest gift of all.
Mm. Beautifully stated. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I've loved talking to you. Your website, I'm going to have you say it here, but you guys, it's in the show notes too, all the links that you need. But where do you want them to go to find more about you?
Yep. You can just go to horriblylovely.com. The book's there. We have a community. You can even go and there's chat rooms and we're doing videos to explain some of the things that are happening in the book so that if you get triggered during the process, you can understand, okay, here was the deeper beauty that was maybe emerging within that. So go to the website. Hatched in Love is my Instagram profile. I think love is the tenet of so much that I'm just fascinated by. So Hatched in Love, find me there and would love to talk to anybody. The alchemy quiz, when you finish it, there's a chance to do a 15-minute phone call just to meet one another and talk. So awesome. I want to be open and available and hear people's stories because putting a book out there, I know, people are listening to mine, and I really believe this cocktail party is what we need in the world.
Yep. Here's to the cocktail party. And I just really want to honor too that you hold space with such a sense of sacred responsibility. It's like you don't want to open something for someone by way of your book and your stories without holding that space really responsibly for them and with them. And that's huge. I really honor you for that.
Appreciate that. It was an absolute
All
joy.
right.
Jen, thank you very, very much. I appreciate it. Next time we talk, we're getting more into you, and I want to pick your brain on so many things you shared too. So
there's a whole lot there.
I really
Good
appreciate
times.
it. Yeah. Thank you for sharing too. We got into a little bit of it. I really appreciate you sharing and allowing me to see you a little bit.
Yeah, you got it. Same. Oh, thank you so much. And y'all, I'm just so glad you were here with us. Thanks for being a part of this conversation and diving in bravely into deeper waters. And I'm just honored you would spend time with us, that you'd remain open, that you'd listen more deeply. I love this notion that we listen so deeply for a person, they can't help but blossom in our presence. And I feel like that is what you all do alongside me when we are together in these conversations. So thanks y'all for being here. And thanks, Jon. We'll see you guys next time.